Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the world you went to sleep in has suddenly changed. The systems that quietly support everyday life, the oil that fuels cars, the gas that warms homes, and the ships that deliver food and goods across oceans have all been thrown into uncertainty. In a matter of hours, global supply lines could slow or even stop, not because of a natural disaster, but because of a geopolitical confrontation centered on a single region of the world. At the center of this dramatic scenario is a figure who has remained largely out of the public spotlight for years, Mojtaba Khamenei. According to various political discussions and speculation, Mojtaba Khamenei has increasingly become a key figure in Iran's internal power structure. Though he has rarely spoken publicly and has never held an elected office, analysts have long viewed him as influential behind the scenes due to his connections with powerful political and military networks inside the country. His father, Ali Khamenei, served for decades as Iran's supreme leader, shaping the direction of the Islamic Republic's domestic and foreign policies. In early 2026, a dramatic series of events shook the region. Tensions between Iran, the United States, and Israel had been building for years over issues including regional security, nuclear policy, and the activities of armed groups across the Middle East. According to reports and speculation circulating in geopolitical discussions, a coordinated military operation targeted multiple locations inside Iran. The strikes reportedly focused on strategic government and military sites across several major cities, including Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, and Kermanshah. The immediate aftermath of these strikes created intense uncertainty across the region. Instead of collapsing into chaos, Iran responded quickly by mobilizing its military capabilities. Reports suggested that missiles and drones were launched toward various locations associated with American or Allied military infrastructure in the Middle East. These developments dramatically increased the risk of a wider regional conflict. Within Iran's political system, leadership decisions were also unfolding rapidly. The body responsible for selecting the country's supreme leader, the Assembly of Experts, convened to determine the future leadership of the country. Following deliberations, Mojtaba Khamenei was reportedly selected as the next supreme leader, making him the third person to hold that position since the establishment of the Islamic Republic in 1979. Senior figures in Iran's government and military institutions quickly pledged loyalty to the new leadership. International reactions were swift and varied. Some Western officials expressed skepticism or criticism regarding the leadership transition, while other global powers took a different approach. Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, publicly signaled support for Iran and emphasized the importance of continued cooperation between the two countries. China, led by Xi Jinping, also voiced concern about escalating tensions and urged restraint from all sides. At the same time, attention quickly shifted to one of the most strategically important waterways in the world, the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow passage connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and serves as the primary route for a significant portion of global oil exports. Every day, millions of barrels of crude oil move through this corridor, supplying energy markets across Asia, Europe, and beyond. Any disruption to shipping in this area has immediate consequences for the global economy. When tensions rise, shipping companies often reroute vessels or suspend operations to protect crews and cargo. Even the possibility of conflict can drive up insurance costs and push oil prices higher in international markets. In past crises, the mere threat of instability in the Strait of Hormuz has been enough to send energy prices soaring. During the recent escalation, reports emerged suggesting that commercial vessels were being warned about increased security risks in the region. Some tankers reportedly turned around or delayed voyages while awaiting further instructions from maritime authorities. These developments quickly affected global energy markets where prices are highly sensitive to supply disruptions. Rising oil prices ripple through the entire world economy. When fuel becomes more expensive, transportation costs increase for nearly every product that travels by truck, train, ship, or airplane. Manufacturing costs rise, airline ticket prices climb, and inflationary pressures grow stronger. For developing countries that depend heavily on imported energy, such changes can create serious economic strain. The Gulf region itself also faced growing security concerns. Several countries host major military facilities connected to Western defense networks. For example, Al Udeid Air Base serves as one of the most important American military installations in the Middle East, coordinating operations across a wide geographic area. Other bases in countries like Bahrain, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates also play critical roles in regional security. When retaliatory strikes began targeting locations linked to these facilities, tensions escalated further. Governments across the Gulf issued statements condemning attacks on their territory and warning that they reserved the right to defend their national security. Members of the Gulf Cooperation Council coordinated diplomatic responses and discussed possible steps to prevent the situation from deteriorating further. One of the most surprising developments reported by some analysts involved the possibility that regional states might take more direct military action in response to attacks. For instance, discussion circulated about potential retaliatory measures by countries such as Qatar or Saudi Arabia if their infrastructure or civilian areas were threatened. While details remained uncertain, these conversations highlighted how quickly a localized crisis could evolve into a much broader confrontation. Security experts, including former intelligence and military officials, warned that miscalculations could play a dangerous role in such an environment. Figures like David Petraeus noted that targeting Gulf states could risk pushing previously neutral countries into the conflict. If multiple regional actors became directly involved, the scale of the confrontation could expand dramatically. Beyond the military dimension, the crisis also carried enormous political symbolism. Across parts of the Middle East and the broader global South, narratives began circulating about sovereignty, foreign intervention, and resistance to outside influence. In this context, leadership transitions and international reactions took on deeper ideological meaning for many observers. At the same time, policymakers around the world were closely monitoring the economic consequences. Central banks, energy ministries, and international organizations were analyzing how prolonged instability in the Persian Gulf might affect global growth, trade flows, and financial markets. The interconnected nature of modern supply chains means that disruptions in one region can quickly affect industries and consumers thousands of miles away. Ultimately, the unfolding situation highlighted a broader reality of modern geopolitics. Events in a single strategic location can influence the entire international system. The Persian Gulf sits at the crossroads of energy, trade, and military power, making it one of the most sensitive regions on the planet. Whether the crisis eventually cools through diplomacy or escalates further depends on decisions being made in capitals around the world. Leaders must weigh national interests, domestic political pressures, and the potential consequences of military action. History shows that moments like these can either spiral into wider conflict or eventually give way to negotiations and new political arrangements. For ordinary people watching from afar, the stakes are not abstract. The outcomes will influence the price of energy, the stability of global markets, and the broader balance of power-shaping international relations in the years ahead. In that sense, what happens in the Persian Gulf is not just a regional story. It is part of a much larger narrative about how the global order adapts to moments of intense geopolitical stress. There is another way to interpret what happened, and it is the argument that supporters of Mojtaba Khamenei would likely make if they were explaining Iran's strategy directly. From their perspective, Iran's decision to strike locations in Gulf countries that host American military bases was not a careless mistake. It was meant to send a very specific message to the region. The message was simple. There is no longer any such thing as a neutral host for American military power in the Middle East. If a country allows United States forces to operate from its territory to attack Iran, then that country becomes part of the conflict. In this view, neutrality disappears the moment foreign bases are used for military operations. For the leaders of the Gulf monarchies, kings, emirs, and crown princes who had tried for years to balance relations with both Washington and Tehran, this message forced a difficult calculation. As missiles struck airports, refineries, and infrastructure across the region, those leaders were suddenly confronted with a question they had long avoided. If conflict between Iran and the United States expands, where exactly do they stand? And what will the cost of that choice be for their countries? While these regional pressures were unfolding, an equally important drama was taking place inside Iran's own political system. The country's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, had come to power with a reputation as a relatively moderate political figure who supported diplomacy and engagement with other nations. In the midst of the crisis, he appeared on international television and publicly apologized to neighboring countries for the strikes that had landed on their territory. He ordered Iran's armed forces to stop attacks on Gulf states and emphasized the need to distinguish between American military targets and civilian infrastructure belonging to regional neighbors. However, events on the ground suggested that the situation was far more complicated than a simple presidential directive. The powerful military institution known as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps continued its operations. Missiles and drones were still being launched, and the pace of retaliation did not immediately slow. To outside observers, this created the impression that the Revolutionary Guard was operating with a high degree of autonomy during the chaotic early days of the conflict. The episode revealed an important reality about Iran's political structure. Within the Islamic Republic, the ultimate authority over the armed forces rests with the supreme leader rather than the president. With the previous leader gone and the new one still consolidating authority, the military response reflected a period of intense internal transition. Mojtaba Khamenei's first challenge as the new supreme leader was therefore not only managing an external war, but also asserting full command over the complex network of political and military institutions that define Iran's power structure. One of the clerics from the Assembly of Experts, the body responsible for selecting Iran's supreme leader, explained the reasoning behind Mojtaba's selection in a way that captured the revolutionary mindset guiding the decision. According to him, the chosen leader should be someone disliked by Iran's adversaries rather than praised by them. This statement reflected a deeper ideological position that has shaped the Islamic Republic since the revolution of 1979. In this worldview, legitimacy comes not from international approval, but from resisting what Iranian leaders describe as foreign domination. That perspective has gained resonance beyond Iran's borders. When Russian President Vladimir Putin expressed strong support for Tehran, the gesture was widely interpreted as part of Moscow's broader geopolitical calculations. Russia remains deeply engaged in the conflict in Ukraine and continues to face extensive Western sanctions. From a strategic standpoint, any crisis that diverts American attention, strains alliances, or drives global energy prices higher can indirectly benefit Moscow's position. China's response reflected a different but equally strategic logic. The government of Xi Jinping emphasized opposition to targeting political leaders and called for stability. China imports vast amounts of energy from the Persian Gulf and has spent years expanding economic partnerships across the Middle East through infrastructure projects and trade initiatives. While Beijing does not benefit from instability in energy markets, it also sees diplomatic opportunities in presenting itself as a voice of restraint and respect for sovereignty during times of crisis. Regional politics added another layer of complexity. Iraq's government, operating in a political environment where Iranian-aligned groups wield significant influence, expressed solidarity with Tehran. The powerful network of militias known as the Popular Mobilization Forces maintains strong ties with Iran and plays a major role in Iraq's security landscape. This reality makes it extremely unlikely that Baghdad would align itself with any military campaign directed against Iran. Meanwhile, the movement known as the Houthi movement in Yemen continued to demonstrate its ability to disrupt maritime trade routes. Over the previous years, the Houthis had launched attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea, forcing vessels traveling between Asia and Europe to reroute around Africa. Their alignment with Iran represents an operational extension of Tehran's influence far beyond its own borders. Together, these relationships form what many analysts describe as an informal strategic network. Russia contributes diplomatic and military cooperation. China provides economic connections and global influence. Regional partners and allied groups extend Iran's reach across multiple fronts, from Lebanon to Yemen. At the same time, Israel was conducting its own military campaign across the region. Israeli forces carried out strikes against positions linked to the Lebanese group Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and in parts of Beirut. In one notable operation, an airstrike reportedly targeted a meeting of senior Iranian commanders connected to the Quds Force, demonstrating Israel's continued intelligence capabilities even during intense conflict. Israel's military also claimed several technological milestones during the fighting. Reports suggested that a Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II fighter jet shot down an Iranian training aircraft over Tehran, highlighting the advanced capabilities of modern aerial warfare. Simultaneously, Israeli forces targeted fuel and oil storage facilities, producing dramatic scenes of fires visible across large sections of the capital. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu framed the campaign not only as a military operation, but also as an attempt to weaken Iran's ruling system and encourage internal political change. Yet this objective revealed one of the central strategic uncertainties surrounding the entire conflict. Removing or weakening a leadership structure does not automatically guarantee stability afterward. In countries with large populations and complex political systems, sudden power vacuums can create unpredictable outcomes. While military operations continued, economists and financial analysts began focusing on another critical issue: the impact of the crisis on global trade and energy markets. Iran's actions around the Strait of Hormuz demonstrated how vulnerable the world's economic infrastructure can be. A large portion of global oil exports flows through this narrow waterway, making it one of the most strategically important locations on Earth. Even partial disruption to shipping in this area can cause oil prices to surge dramatically. When energy costs rise, the effects spread quickly through the global economy. Transportation becomes more expensive, manufacturing costs increase, and consumer prices climb across nearly every sector. Analysts warned that if the strait remained blocked for an extended period, oil prices could potentially reach extremely high levels. At such prices, the consequences would extend far beyond energy markets. Supply chains would slow, food costs would rise due to higher transportation and fertilizer expenses. Governments in energy-importing countries could face serious economic pressure. For Iran's leadership, these economic dynamics are part of a long-standing strategic calculation. Iranian strategists have often argued that their country cannot match the military power of larger adversaries in a direct confrontation. Instead, they have developed methods designed to impose broader economic costs on opponents and on the international system itself. Whether that strategy succeeds depends on how long governments and societies are willing to tolerate rising economic pressure. If energy prices continue climbing and supply disruptions spread, political leaders around the world will face increasing pressure from their own populations to push for a diplomatic resolution. What is clear is that the crisis has already reshaped the geopolitical landscape. The leadership transition in Tehran has taken place despite attempts to prevent it. Regional powers that hope to remain neutral are now being drawn into the confrontation. And the global economy, from energy traders in London to shipping companies in Singapore, is watching events in the Persian Gulf with growing concern. The conflict has moved beyond being a regional dispute. It now represents a broader test of the international order that has dominated global politics for decades. The outcome will influence energy markets, military alliances, and the balance of power between major nations. The coming weeks and months will determine whether diplomacy eventually cools the situation or whether escalation pushes the world toward an even more dangerous phase of confrontation. Whatever happens next will not only shape the future of the Middle East, it will shape the economic and political environment that people around the world live in.